Solving quadratics and problem solving. There are two topics we want to discuss in this lesson. First, solving polynomial equations. And second, problem solving using polynomials. First, let's look at a problem. The square of a number minus twice the number is 63. Find the number. So first, let's write down what we know. We know that we have the square of a number. Anytime we see the words a number, we're going to have a variable. So a square of a number is x squared minus twice the number minus 2x is means equal and 63. So we have this equation we want to solve. Well, remember, anytime we are solving for an equation, a quadratic, we want to set it equal to 0. And so once it's set equal to 0, we know how to solve by factoring. We can do product sum. Well, because the leading coefficient is 1, the product is just negative 63. The sum is negative 2. So what can we multiply together to get negative 63? Those same two numbers add together to get negative 2. And so our factors are x minus 9, x plus 7. But remember, the question did not say to factor. The question said to find the number. And so we're going to set this expression equal to 0 and then this expression equal to 0. So that means x will equal 9 and x equals negative 7. Let's look at another one. The length of a rectangular garden is 6 feet more than its width. The area of the garden is 187 square feet. Find the length and the width of the garden. Let's first assign our variables. Let's let our variable x equal the width, and if the width is x and the length is 6 feet more, the length will be x plus 6. And our area is given to us as 187 feet. So now we know that our area equals length times width. We're going to plug in what we know. Our area, our length, and our width. We now have this equation. Well, let's get this to look like a quadratic. So we're going to first FOIL the x to the x and to the 6. And then we're going to subtract 187 from both sides of my equation so I can set the expression equal to 0. And now we do product sum. So what could you multiply together to get negative 187? Those same two numbers add together to get 6. And I think we would have 17 and negative 11. So x minus 11 times x plus 17. So that means x will equal 11 and x will equal negative 17. But be careful here, because the question asks for the length and the width. You cannot have a negative distance. So the answer cannot be negative 17. It must only be positive 11. And so once I figure out that x is 11, I can then add 6 to it in order to figure out what the width is. So the length would be 11 and the width would be 17. And remember, when you have word problems, you must have word answers. So our answer is the width of the garden is 11 feet and the length is 17 feet. The product of two consecutive positive integers is 132. Find the two integers. Well, let's first write down what we know. The product of two integers, two positive integers. So the product means that you multiply. So if we have two positive integers, if the first integer is x, the next integer must be x plus 1. And so the product of those two means we must multiply those together, and our answer is 132. Similarly, we want to multiply x times x and x times 1. We want to subtract 132 from both sides of our equation. And we want to then do product sum. And so what could you multiply together to get negative 132? Add together to get 1. 12 and negative 11. So our factors are x plus 12 times x minus 11. So x will equal negative 12 and 11. Be careful. The question says consecutive positive integers. That means that x cannot equal negative 12. So x is 11, and if x is 11, the next number is 12. Pythagorean theorem. In a right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the two legs will be equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. So what does that mean? When you have a right triangle, the longest side is always called the hypotenuse. A right triangle. When you have a right triangle, the longest side is called the hypotenuse, and the other two sides are called the legs. So this is the longest side of our right triangle, leg, leg. And this is called our hypotenuse. So there's a formula to figure out the length of any given side given two sides of a right triangle. The formula is this. Now A stands for one of the legs and B stands for one of the legs. It doesn't make a difference which one they are. It's just A and B are the legs, but C must be the hypotenuse. So if we're solving for this, let's make A 5 and make B 12. And so as we solve, C equals 13. For the next problem, set it up the exact same way. Remember, our legs are A and B, our hypotenuse is C. And so, as we solve, we want to now subtract 9 from both sides. Square root B squared and square root 16. We get 4. B equals 4. So let's not use the Pythagorean theorem for a word problem. Imagine two boys are back to back. The boys take 4 steps in the opposite direction. They both turn right and take 3 more steps. How many steps away are they from each other? See if you can use the Pythagorean theorem to solve this problem. Please pause the video and I will give you the answer in a second. Okay, so to solve this, let's look at a visual representation. If the two boys walk in opposite directions, and then they both turn right, that's his right, and that's his right, their distance is here. So if we just look at this right triangle, we can use the Pythagorean theorem to figure out what this distance is. And then we can use the Pythagorean theorem to figure out what this distance is. That distance is 5. That distance is 5. So the boys are 10 steps away from each other. All right. So our last word problem. Find the length of the shorter leg of the right triangle if the longer leg is 10 miles more than the shorter leg and the hypotenuse is 10 miles less than twice the shorter leg. Well, I gave you the information here. The shorter leg, the longer leg is 10 miles longer than the shorter leg, and the hypotenuse is 10 miles less than twice the shorter leg. So we want to use the Pythagorean theorem here. Let's square our legs and then take the sum of those. That will be equal to the hypotenuse squared. So now in this case, I must square this binomial and square this binomial. Remember, to square the binomial, you must do x times x, then x times 10, then 10 times x, then 10 times 10, and the same with this binomial as well. And then combine like terms. And remember, with any quadratic, we want to set the quadratic equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract everything from this side of my equation, so it's set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 2x squared, subtract 20x, and subtract 100. When I do that, I'm left with this. Next, I'm going to divide out a 2 from both terms. So I'm actually dividing both sides of my equation by 2. So 0 divided by 2 is still 0. And then this side divided by 2 gives me this. Now I'm going to factor out an x from each one of my terms on the right side of my equation. So now I have x equals 0 and x minus 30 equals 0. Well, if you remember, this was a word problem, and x is the distance, and 0 is not going to be the distance. So x cannot be 0. So x equals 30. Please make sure you complete the My Math Lab homework out of 6.7. Thank you.